Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Adventures of a Real Estate Investor. I'm Susie.
And I'm Michael, and we're excited you joined us for this adventure.
So today's special guest is Brain Briscoe. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. This is awesome.
Yeah, and we are really excited. For everyone who doesn't know, the first meetup that we ever joined for multifamily was Brian's, and it was completely eye-opening, right? Like from there, we have met so many people. We've also learned about so many more meetups, so many more conferences. So really, you are our growth. So thank you.
Yeah, no, not a problem. Thank you. I mean, I hate to say it, but a couple of ways I selfishly set up the meetup because, I set it up right when COVID started, and I had planned on setting it up before the COVID shutdowns, but I was driving all over DC. I like spending like 2 hours a week, driving towards or 2 hours driving towards each one of the seminars because DC traffic at, quitting time is just terrible. But I wanted something that met my schedule a lot better. And I'm like, you know what? There's nothing like within 30 miles of my house. I should just start my own. And that's what I ended up doing. And it ended up growing into something that's been, you guys have obviously gotten a lot of value out of it. And I think a lot of people have. So it's been a lot of value added for me too as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that a little bit, it's like you just starting that meetup you've impacted our lives and our investing journey, like in words that we can't even describe, right? So yes, thank you again.
So the first episode I ever did was actually with Brian. So it seemed very, natural to have you as our first interviewed episode. Yeah. So yeah, it's awesome you're here.
Yeah, and you guys have both been on my podcast twice, so it's been fun. And I mean, for people who don't know, my podcast, I bring people on as, aspiring investors, quote unquote, and then I also do first deal episodes. So, both of you guys came on individually as aspiring investors looking to get into the game. And, it was just a couple months later that you guys had your first deal closed. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you guys come back on and talk about it? But the feeling's mutual. I'd love to see what you guys have done. I do remember the first time you guys showed up. And I remember because, you guys were in the UK and, Michael's in the Air Force, and that's something that really stuck with me. And I was just thinking, wow, I do remember the very first time you guys were bright-eyed and, hey, we're looking to get into this. I think it's a great idea. We talked to someone down the street from us, and in less than a year, you guys have 88 units in Tulsa and another one under contract. So, I mean, that's just absolutely amazing. So phenomenal, guys.
Thanks, Brian. And yeah, we couldn't have done it without your group. So yeah, thank you. So. Yeah. Brian, why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about your background and why you started investing in real estate?
My background, I mean, always hard to decide how far back to go, but I think I followed the normal route. My dad was a blue collar worker. And I knew that because he wore a blue shirt to work every day, and for the longest time, I thought that's what blue collar workers did. But he always impressed on me the importance of, getting a good education so you can get a good job. I think that's the mentality of a lot of people is, go to school, get a good education. And so, I decided that, I like teaching and I was really good at math. And so I just decided, well, I'll be a college professor, in math, and started working towards that, got a bachelor's and a master's, and I started a PhD program. And right when that PhD program started, the World Trade Center went down, and plane ran into the Pentagon, which really changed my course. And that's when I decided to go active duty in the military. And so I commissioned in the Marine Corps, and that was, roughly 20 years ago. And it's no coincidence that I'm retiring, from a 20-year career in the Marine Corps, almost exactly 20 years after September 11th. But along the line, I started realizing that I didn't want to trade time for money. I realized early on, I think my dad, my dad had tried a lot of other businesses and things like that to try to, make more money. But he told me one day, he's like, look, I've never figured out this money thing. There are people that have, and if you ever want to, you've got to find somebody who can teach you. He's like, but that's not me. Is what he said. He's like, you can come to me for financial advice, but just realize that you probably ought to go somewhere else for that. So, he planted the seed at least. And I started reading investment books, reading, Rich Dad Poor Dad was one that was an important one in my career. But it was shortly after reading, Rich Dad Poor Dad, Cash Flow Quadrant, that I started thinking, well, I can do this real estate thing. Incidentally, I remember thinking commercial multifamily or commercial real estate was a bridge too far, and I thought, wow, that's too complicated. I don't even know where to start. But I bought several books on, single family rentals and started reading those. That's where I jumped in, and the whole reason behind it was, I wanted to start detaching my time from my income. I was reading the books like Richest Man in Babylon, which is a really good one, by the way, super simple. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to start making my money work for me instead of me working for money. But so bought a handful of single family properties, ended up renting them out for several years. And, it got to the point to where banks wouldn't lend to me anymore. I mean, this was right after the crash and money was tight for everybody. But, single income with two rentals. When I tried to buy the third, the two banks I called said, no, you're overextended right now. I'm like, no, but I can do this. I can do this. Anyway, long story short, I put that on pause for a couple of years thinking, okay, when I get promoted, we'll pay down some debt. We'll do this, we'll do that, and we'll jump back into it. And finally got to the point to where we were ready to jump back in. And I started really thinking more about, scale, how many single family properties, the question I had is how many single family properties do I need to replace my full-time income? And being the math guy, I started spreadsheeting, and pulled out my handy dandy spreadsheet, made some assumptions on, property, the purchase price, the rents and everything else, and forecasted it. And the answer was way too many, and it was going to take way too long,
Yeah.
So, fortunately, I caught wind of multifamily, apartments. And in my mind, it was just like, a 30 unit, or 30 unit apartment complex is buy one, get 29 free. It is kind of how I started looking at it. It's, and it's amazing that, you add a zero to the end of apartment complexes or to the number of units you purchase, and the income scales, so if you're going to buy a fourplex, buying a 40plex is going to be 10 times more income coming off the property, but it's not 10 times more difficult to purchase. And when I started realizing that, I ditched the multifamily or ditched the single family. Sorry, I actually sold my the two investment properties that I had, and fortunately had been able to gain a lot of appreciation off of those, and decided to jump into multifamily, for the same reasons I started in single family. I wanted to detach my time from my income. And, so, from there, and, obviously this is like super, super high level, overview, from when I decided to do multifamily, just over 3 years ago, we've closed on 485 units. And we've got another 144 under contract. So, that's where we're sitting right now. And, am I getting, have I accomplished my goal yet? As far as replacing my income, I'm close is the answer. But, it's still a lot of fun. I still enjoy helping people, which is part of the reason I have the meetup, so, I'm having fun with this, and, we are making, pretty good money. So it's going to be something that I'm probably going to do for the next, 10, 15, 20 years until I decide to, quit entirely. So, yeah.
No, and something that stuck out, you said it more towards the beginning, but how like your dad was the one who was like, hey, like, I can't teach this. So you need to find someone who does. That's a huge thing that people don't do, So like that in itself, he had like a huge impact on you that way, like being able to say those words could be very difficult depending on the person. So it's like phenomenal that he said that so that you could continue to grow, right? Because we all know that finances are not discussed, like in the school system. So for him to recognize that and say like, you need to find something that will teach you about it is phenomenal.
Yeah. My dad's an amazing person and funny. I mean, he said that when I was like 16 or 17. And at the time I was like, yeah, whatever, dad, like most teenagers are, but for
Yeah.
some reason that stuck with me. And what really stuck with me, and this what was also during my teenage years, I remember my dad having a conversation with my brother, with his brother. And I just remember my dad laughing, and just laughing at his brother. And I'm like, after the conversation, I'm like, Dad, what was so funny? He's like, well, my brother was going to my dad for marital advice. I'm like, what's wrong with that? I mean, shouldn't you go to your parents? And he looked at me and says, my dad's been divorced 4 times.
Oh, that's a bummer.
And he just pointed out to me, he's like, if my brother's going to my dad for marital advice, what type of advice do you think he's giving him? Do you think he's going to give advice that's going to be able to keep his marriage alive and well? I mean, the advice he gives is probably going to lead him to divorce too, So, I mean, that was another one of those little lessons learned that, my dad just pointed out. He's like, if you want to get help, if you want to get advice, if you want to make it somewhere, find somebody who's been there and latch onto them. Don't take advice from people who aren't able to do or haven't done what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and sometimes you see this a lot where other people who haven't been where somebody wants to be, and they're giving advice about something, right?
Yeah.
They've never experienced, either are successful in it or have failed in it, right? And they're trying to give advice to somebody, and it's unfortunate how many people actually listen to those people, right?
Yeah. I see it on Facebook all the time, in a lot of these like investment, groups or whatever. It's like, what do you guys suggest I do? And then there's just like, tons and tons and tons and tons of responses. And I kind of scroll through there and I'm just, and 90% of them are just crap. It's just like, wow. I hope he doesn't listen. But, yeah.
Which is crazy though, too, because like it's really difficult for people to actually listen, right? Like having the skill of being able to actively listen is so difficult. I mean, we're in this culture where people like interrupt, who like just want to put in that last word, So I also find it ironic how many people ask for advice and then just read the comments and who knows what goes from there. But that's a whole different thought.
And interesting you bring that up. I had made up my mind a couple of years ago that I'd do this myself. It's like, what, and it comes from when I was a kid. I was usually one of the smartest kids in my class, and and when you're used to being smarter than everyone around you, you never ask for help, and that's kind of what happened to me. And I started touring multifamily properties, calling, brokers, and we're talking like 8, 12 unit type stuff. And I remember walking out of one and realizing that I had no idea if it was going to be a good deal. I had no idea how to compute the renovation expenses. I had no idea whether it was going to cash flow. I could figure out the mortgage. I could figure out, I have the math skills to do it, but I didn't have the expertise in that field to be able to put the right numbers on the spreadsheet, and that's when I realized that I needed help, and it was just like, well, I really want to do this. And quite frankly, my single family investments were just kind of, I bought what's available, and the appreciation is what made the money. It wasn't the cash flow on either one of them. But so I realized that I needed help. And that's when I started thinking about, what my dad had told me. It's like, well, I need to find somebody who's done this, and latch onto them. And that's what I ended up doing. At the time, there was a couple of, podcasters that I listened to that were just starting coaching programs. And I just jumped headfirst into one of them, and said, hey, look, you know what? It's going to cost some money, but that's all right. I'll sell a single family home. It'll liquidate a bunch of capital. I'll, use that money to launch my multifamily. And, that was enormously beneficial, having somebody who's been there and done that, essentially look over my shoulder through the process of the first couple of deals.
Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people realize too, like what coaching or mentoring, or even like if you self-educate, I mean, like you really have to self-educate yourself, right? Like you have to be really dedicated to it. But like the education in itself, from no matter where you get it, like creates a huge impact. You like are more confident when you're speaking to people in meetups and in person, like you are more likely to start like that thought leadership platform because you're like, oh, okay, I know what I'm actually writing about or talking
Yeah.
about. So like this will all start to make sense. It's like the impact that even education has in itself is immeasurable.
Yeah, game changer. I mean, and you're right. I mean, anybody can self-educate, and actually, out of the 5 guys in Four Oaks Capital right now, 2 of us did coaching programs, and well, out of the other founders, the other 2 were, the self-educated type that hustled. You can do it both ways, but the coaching program, the mentorship, finding that person that can help you will accelerate your growth. And the 2 that didn't do the coaching programs, they do have mentors. They do have people that can pick up the phone and call. It just wasn't it took a little longer to develop the relationship. I mean, developing a relationship in a coaching program is simple. You pay money, you get a coach. But and it is quick, and that's why I went that route. Really, is I had a very limited timeline. I made the decision to go all in about 3 years ago, which was 3 years from retirement. And the main reason that I wanted to go full bore was I wanted to have the option of retiring. Now 3 years ago, I hadn't 100% committed to retiring at my 20-year mark. I was still, playing the game, rolling the dice, maybe seeing if I could get a command opportunity or whatever. But so I looked at my limited timeline and I said, okay, if I want to replace my annual income in less than 3 years, I need to do something. I can't be patient. I can't, do this long-term foster, develop relationships, find a mentor. That might take, 6 months to a year. So that was part of the reason that I did coaching, was just because I had a 3-year timeline, and I wanted to make sure that, when I retired, my kids, my kids didn't have a huge drop in standard of living, and that's, obviously important, to us, is to be able to provide for the families. But so coaching was the obvious choice when I sat down and looked at it, because of the ability to jumpstart your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I fully believe that, Susie and I, when we first got into multifamily, like we dove in head first, like education, right? Like we didn't even know, because we were so fast like getting all the education, like we didn't know that coaching programs like existed really. By the time like we had like figured some of it out, and we were like, oh wait, all these coaching programs are available. And then at that time, we had also started to develop a relationship with a mentor who ended up being like a coach mentor for us, just like organically that we've met. But I'll tell you right now, I firmly believe you need some sort of mentor, or a coach mentor, or whatever you want to call it, to help you take down any kind of multifamily property, whether that's you joining a team and then showing that that sponsorship team is like your mentor, or what, because like when you're responsible for, millions of dollars of investors' capital, it's very real, right? Like this is not a joke, you don't just play around with stuff like that. And so making sure that you're very confident in your underwriting, and that confidence comes from your mentor, is huge. I think it's a very big part of multifamily investing.
Yeah, and add on to that, you're not going to get a loan if you don't have somebody with experience on your team. True. So, and the mentor can cover down on that as well. So just one of those little, when I started the down the road, that's one thing I didn't really realize, that we needed to have, experienced people on the loan. We need to have net worth and liquidity. And I hadn't really done more than scratch the surface on, what were the requirements to actually get a loan. But your mentor ideally is somebody that can do that too. Obviously you want to find somebody with experience, but if they've also got a little bit of net worth and a little bit of liquidity, they can help you qualify for larger loans.
Absolutely. Yeah. So something you like have talked about, is like trading time for money. So like, what does this mean for like your family now that you're not going to be in like the traditional military role anymore?
I think it's going to be a lot better for my family. I mean, You guys know the lifestyle, but since 2001, we have moved 9 times.
Hmm.
And that's some of the times where, I mean, there was like a 3-month assignment here. There was a 9-month assignment there. A couple of most of them have been 3-year tours, but there was enough of the little assignments that we've moved 9 times in 20 years.
Hmm.
So my older kids and my two oldest, 21 and 18, they were basically with me almost the entire career, just getting plucked up and moved, plucked up and moved, plucked up and moved. And now we have 3 younger kids, 10, 8, and 5. And the difference between their childhood is they're going to live in the same place for several years. My 10-year-old is going to go to the same middle school and the same high school, in the same area is the idea. And then the 2 little kids, will go to the elementary school, middle school, high school in the same area, which, I mean, to a lot of people may not sound, great, but, to me, who's had to, see my kids, readjust and, leave friends on one side and show up to a brand new school in a brand new neighborhood with, no friends every couple, 9 times in 20 years. That's huge for me. And that's actually part of the reason that, that's what multifamily was designed to do. After moving here to the DC area, the move was especially hard for one of my daughters. And actually 2 of my daughters had a really hard time moving here, but not wanting to put them through that again, it was, high on my priority list. And I realized that as long as I was in the military, they had that ability. They could just pluck me up and say, you're moving here, you're moving there, and I didn't have a lot of choice. My choices are say yes and do it, or say no and not have a job. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's huge. I mean, it even could have been like part of that for your wife. So like for me, I had thought that a W-2 was like supposed to be part of my identity. It's like the first time that we moved, I was like, okay, well, who am I now? Right? Like I can't find a job in the UK, or I had been applying, I applied to over 50 places and I was like, this is really hard, So, I mean, this is great for anybody in the military to hear, because you do have options to where like you can leave the military, not have to move, and like not have that like negative impact on your children or your spouse or whoever, just because like multifamily is a great place for you to be home. Because a huge thing too in the Air Force is that I meet spouses all the time whose husbands are gone all of the time, right?
Yeah.
So there's more options out there, for stability.
Yeah. In 20 years, I've done 4 deployments, and that's a lot of time away. And that's not including the exercises and the temporary duty trips that you do. But, and you bring up the spouse issue, and I focused more on my kids because, a lot of times when my wife and I talk, we're focusing on kids, but, my wife has wanted to teach high school, for 20 years now. And, during one tour, she was able to finish her degree, but we're moving so much that she's had a hard time finding credentialing, being able to credential, and so, interestingly enough, just yesterday, she got offered a music teacher position at one of the schools in Idaho Falls where we're moving. And so, it's impact for my wife now is we can live where we want next to family. So we're going to be within a couple miles of her 2 sisters and her parents. And she just, applied for and got the job that she's wanted to have for 20 years, and school teachers don't make a lot of money, but she enjoys it. She enjoys music, she enjoys teaching, she enjoys kids. So another impact this has given is now my wife's able to, do what she's wanted to do for a long time.
Yeah, because even when you're at the point where you can like pursue your passions, like you're a totally different person in the efforts that you give to. So I can only imagine like how excited and happy she'll be like with those students, being able to do like really what she's finally wanted. So that's beautiful. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So we're excited for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love how, your focus on leveraging real estate is to make an impact on your family, right? Like not uprooting them and moving them even more, right? Especially, I know, at least in the Air Force, like when you get promoted, if you get promoted to full bird colonel in 06, like you're owned by the colonel's board or whatever it's called. And you do like 1 year assignments, basically, maybe 2 if you're lucky. And then they basically own you for however long until if you want to get out or if you want to get promoted again, right?
Yeah. I mean, just at the Pentagon, I've been there for 3 years. I've worked for 4 different colonels.
Wow.
Yes, in 3 years, 4 different colonels, and so it's just one of those things where I see them move out, move in and move out. And in the division that I work in, there's 4 colonels that work there. And it's almost like there's a rotating door on each one of those offices. And then, the next rank up from there is general. And I've had, now 3 different generals, and they're all in that spot for a year. And they've all either moved away from the Pentagon or retired out of that job. So 1 retired, 2 of them moved away. And, the general I currently worked for has, literally moved to the Pentagon less than a year ago, and he's moving again in June. So the higher in rank you get, the less stability you have for your family is kind of how it looks. And I started seeing the writing on the wall, a couple of years ago where, if I wanted to pursue, the higher ranks, if I wanted to, pursue colonel or even general officer, it was going to take, moving, maybe 5 times in a 7-year period. Just looking at what you have to do to be competitive, try to get a command spot somewhere, selected for command. And then there's the war college that is, a check in the box and one of those requirements you have to have. And that's another move for a 9-month period. And then you almost undoubtedly go back to the Pentagon again and do a year or 2 there. And then you're hopefully in line for the next command. So I put everything on the calendar, and it was literally 5 moves in 7 years. I was just like, that does not look attractive anymore.
Right. You're like, I'm going to opt out. This is where I got the box. Yeah.
And quite frankly, when I started this multifamily thing, I'm like, you know what? It would be cool to be a commanding officer somewhere, and I think I would enjoy that, but I want to have other options. And interestingly, as my real estate career got more and more traction, my focus changed, so all of a sudden being a commanding officer or CO somewhere just didn't seem that attractive. And I'll never know if I was good enough because I took my name out of the hat, 3 years in a row. And it was just like, okay, so yeah, anyway, it's definitely given us options. And, one of the options was, getting out of the military. And like I said, up front, I wanted to have the option to do it because I had that realization that, I'm addicted to this paycheck. I'm addicted to this income stream. And if I don't change something about my financial picture, then I will work for the Marine Corps until they kick me out, is essentially what my realization was.
Yeah,
so
exactly. And that's why I think we see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I had the same realization, right? Like, okay, when I'm done teaching back at the academy, it's like my final tour for my 20 years, like what do I do afterwards, right? And a lot of military members just end up transitioning to, government service job or working as a contractor and do another 20 years and pick up double pension, right?
Yeah.
I thought about that and I was like, man, that does not, for me, it doesn't seem appealing at all. And so we, after discovering the power of real estate, we're like, man, this is an awesome way. Yeah. So I can fully retire just like you are. When in 7 years when I can retire, and then we can just do whatever we want, right? And just live off the distributions from being a passive investor and
have adventures.
Yep,
go have adventures. Exactly. And make an impact. So yeah. So unfortunately it brings us to the end of the show, Brian, but before we finish up, we want to go into the Adventurous 4. These are 4 adventurous questions that we ask every guest. So the first question is, where is one place you wish to travel and why?
Rome. And the reason why is when we put up big bucks for the coaching program, that was the one promise I made to my wife. She's like, well, this better get me a Rome trip out of it. So I promised my wife that, we'd take a trip to Rome. And that's where I want to travel right now. And unfortunately, about the time that we had enough, income from the properties to make the trip, COVID shut travel down. So that might get pushed another year. Yeah. Wah, wah.
Now you can go. Now you can go to Rome and some other place too. You got enough income.
Yeah. So, yep.
Nice.
Well, and the number 2 is, what is the number 1 thing on your bucket list, and how are you leveraging real estate to achieve it?
I realized a long time ago that, kids appreciate, time and adventures more than they appreciate presents, and several years ago, I had an opportunity to go to Mexico City for work, and I decided to, for Christmas, bring my whole family there, and my daughter, she was probably 12 at the time. She's 18 now. Maybe she was 10, I don't know, but 10 to 12 was where she was at. And she's like, "You mean we're not getting presents?" And I looked at her and I had a stroke of genius. It doesn't happen very often, but I just looked at her and said, "What did you get for Christmas last year?" And she looked at me and she's like, and she couldn't remember. So next time I asked her a question, I'm like, will you remember a trip to Mexico City? And she said, yes. So my bucket list is, I want to be able to, once a year, just go on a big epic vacation. Maybe it's Mexico City. We've done, Rio. We've done a couple other really fun ones, but and now I've got a son-in-law, and maybe the next 5 or 8 years, grandkids or whatever. But just every year, take our entire family out on a vacation and just do something really, really cool. So
I love
Rome
that.
Rome will be the first one though, and that's just me and my wife. Kids are staying home.
Yeah.
Nice. So the third question is, what is one piece of advice for someone who wants to start passively investing in real estate?
For a passive investor, I would say vet the sponsors. That's more important than vetting the deal. I think you need to understand. Number one, I would just actually, before that, I would say you need to understand what your financial goals are. Okay. And how is real estate going to fit into your financial goals? And the second thing, I know you said one piece of advice, the second thing is, find a sponsor that like, and trust. And that's really, I think, the first steps for anybody.
No, those are awesome. Thank you. Then the final question is, if you had unlimited resources available to you, how would you leave an impact?
Probably just ramp up a lot of the stuff that I do now. I mean, we have been giving at least 10% of our income to charities for a long time. I'm not a fairly religious person. I went on a mission for my church when I was, 19. And, if I had unlimited resources, I'd probably just keep on doing that, go on different missions, go to, help people in, South America, Africa, wherever in the world that it needs to happen. I also love the idea of funding education. It's something that, I was able to apply for financial aid and get financial aid going through school, but I know a lot of those wells have dried up, but, just go to my alma mater, University of Utah, and set up a bunch of scholarships and just say, hey, here's a bunch of money, send a lot of kids to school. So that's the other thing. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I think education solves a lot, like just baseline education, right? Like solves a lot of problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of disadvantaged kids, there's a lot of kids that, I thought I was poor growing up, man. I wasn't, but, I thought I was, because I was looking at, TV and all the other kids at school with the designer jeans, and, I was wearing 2-year-old Levi's, but, yeah, education is a big leveler, and, university education isn't like the panacea. Doesn't cure everything, but, it will give people, a better life and a better, better life. There we go. Done.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. So before we end the show, Brian, would you mind sharing with our listeners how they can get a hold of you?
Easiest way, LinkedIn is where I am, most frequently. So, send me a connection request, tell me, hey, I heard you on Michael and Susie's podcast, and I'll accept it. But that'll start a conversation. Website's fouroakscapital.com. We also have a podcast, diaryofanappartmentinvestor.com, and both of those websites, you can put your contact information in and we'll get a hold of you.
That's awesome. We'll make sure to add those to the show notes. So thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure having you on here, Brian. We are very, very excited that you could join us today. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks guys. I appreciate it.
Until next time, explore more, adventure awaits.
Woo!